The arena was already a storm before the fight even started. Bright lights swinging like restless search beams, the smell of beer and sweat mixing in the air, every seat filled, every voice blending into a wall of noise. Las Vegas knew how to stage a spectacle, and this night was supposed to be one of those polished, money-making showcases. Instead, it became something else entirely. The bout ended in chaos, not because of a knockout or a submission, but because the young favorite, 23, undefeated, full of swagger, decided rules didn't apply to him. In the final round, he threw a knee straight into his opponent's face, while the man was already down. The crowd roared, half in shock, half in admiration of the audacity. The referee jumped between them, arms outstretched, shouting for the bell. His voice cracked from trying to hold control. He called the foul. He raised his hand to issue a warning, possibly even a disqualification. That's when it happened. The fighter leaned in close, sweat pouring down his face, blood still fresh on his gloves, and laughed directly at the referee. Not a nervous laugh, not even a cocky chuckle. A full, open-mouthed cackle, loud enough to rattle through the microphones and roll across the packed stands. It was the sound of a man daring the world to stop him. Some fans erupted into cheers, chanting his name, feeding off the disrespect as if it were rebellion. Others recoiled instantly, booing, shouting insults, waving their arms. The arena split in two, the sound turning jagged, unpredictable, dangerous. The referee tried to keep control, his voice shaking with anger now. "You will respect this sport," he barked, but his words were drowned by the noise. The fighter raised his arms like a showman, strutting across the cage as if he owned it. Then, with cameras fixed on his every move, he turned back toward the official and sneered. "You're not my judge," he said, voice cutting through the roar. "Only strength decides here." The line struck harder than any punch thrown that night. Every person in that arena felt it. It wasn't just a challenge to the referee, it was a slap in the face to the idea of order itself, to the idea that the cage was bound by anything except violence. The crowd reacted instantly. One section erupted in wild applause, young men jumping in their seats, their phones already lifted, streaming live, shouting that this was the future. Another section booed with venom, older fans shaking their heads, disgusted. Parents who had brought their kids to see martial arts as discipline and skill suddenly wondered if they'd made a mistake. Cameras swiveled from the cage to the audience, catching faces twisted in fury, others lit with glee. The broadcast teams spoke over each other. Unprofessional, electric, a disgrace, unforgettable. And yet, beneath the din, there was a sharper silence rising. A pause. Because everyone understood instinctively. This wouldn't stop here. Words like that, spit in the face of the sport itself, would echo far beyond one fight night in Vegas. The referee lowered his hands, shaking his head, visibly rattled. The fighter climbed the cage, straddling the top like a king on his throne, and pointed to the cameras. "Tweet it, clip it, spread it," he shouted. "Nobody can tell me what I can't do." The arena roared back, but the energy had shifted from entertainment to something rawer, darker. It wasn't just about wins and losses anymore. It was about defiance and humiliation played out under a million watching eyes. And somewhere in the crowd, a whisper started. Quiet at first, just a name carried from one fan to another, almost joking, almost fearful. What if Chuck Norris answered that? The idea spread like a spark in dry brush. People nudged each other, repeating it. The broadcast microphones even caught fragments of it, uncertain laughter rippling across the stands. It was absurd, maybe, out of time, but it stuck. Because when a fighter mocks the very idea of rules, people don't just want another fighter to shut him down. They want a symbol. They want someone bigger than the cage, older than the noise, a figure who could make arrogance look small. The fighter hopped down from the cage, arms raised again, soaking in the adoration and the hatred alike. He thought he had owned the night, but the cameras caught something else in that moment. The referee's broken composure, the divided crowd, the shiver of unease running through the audience, and above all, that single whispered question echoing louder and louder in people's minds. What if the old lion heard the call? Just wondering. Where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. By sunrise, the clip wasn't just viral, it was unavoidable. Sports shows replayed it between baseball highlights. Morning news anchors leaned toward each other with staged concern. Late-night hosts rehearsed jokes that would land by evening. Everywhere the same loop, the fighter grinning in the referee's face, declaring that only strength decides. Diners buzzed with debate. At one in Oklahoma City, a waitress refilled mugs while two regulars nearly came to blows. One praising the kid's audacity, the other muttering that arrogance had no place in martial arts. Talk radio lines clogged. Half the callers shouted that rules are shackles. The other half swore the kid had disgraced the sport. One host threw out a question that stuck. What would the old legends think? He rattled off names. The one that echoed longest was Norris. At first it drew laughs, but repetition stripped the humor. By lunchtime, headlines asked it straight. Would Chuck Norris respond? The fighter poured gasoline on the fire. He streamed live from his hotel, blackout curtains pulled tight against the Vegas glare. He leaned into the camera, voice sharp. Old karate guys can watch from their couches. This is a cage, not a dojo. They don't belong here. His grin was deliberate, cruel. Comments flew so fast the screen blurred. A teenage influencer clipped the soundbite, slapped on the caption, "Come get humbled, Grandpa," and racked up millions of views. But the next image that seized the country wasn't staged. Late afternoon in Dallas, a local reporter spotted Norris walking into a small training gym between a tire shop and a laundromat. No entourage, no cameras trailing, just a duffel bag and a nod to the owner. Inside, kids drilled takedowns, the air thick with chalk and disinfectant. The reporter asked about the clip, phone trembling in his hand. Norris watched two teenagers roll clumsily on the mat before answering. "When you laugh at a judge," he said evenly, "you laugh at the sport itself. That's not strength. That's contempt." The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "If he wants to learn the difference between power and pride, I know how to teach it." He went back to helping an older student tape his ankle. That half-minute spread faster than the fighter's stream. News channels replayed it without commentary, just the faint sound of a heavy bag thudding in the background. Older fans shared it like scripture. Younger ones mocked it, but even mockery gave it reach. Calm had become a weapon. The fighter raged louder. In another video, this one filmed in a weight room, iron plates clanging behind him, he raised the stakes. Televised. Open sparring. No edits. No protection. He steps in, or he admits he's scared. Off-camera voices cheered. His manager smiled wide. Comment sections became battlegrounds. A high school coach wrote about discipline. A former cutman explained why mocking a referee was a knife to the sport's throat. A kid in a hoodie filmed himself shadowboxing in a park, captioned, "Respect is the only rule." It didn't trend, but it struck chords. Reporters swarmed the Dallas gym. The owner told them the truth. Norris had trained, spoken his mind, then stayed to mop the mats. That detail made headlines. The contrast was stark. One man live-streaming bravado, another scrubbing sweat in silence. By evening, promoters circled like hawks. Emails pinged between casinos and networks. They knew opportunity when they smelled it. The compromise was quick. An open sparring exhibition, carefully branded to dodge commissions. Not officially a fight, not just a show. Something between, where money could flow and pride could bleed. The fighter posted again, Sharper now. Legends stay legends by staying home. He won't show comments filled with fire emojis and dares. One lone reply read, "Careful what you ask for," and sank under the flood. In Dallas, as the day cooled, Norris tied his shoes slowly after class. The gym owner's son burst in, phone glowing. They want a face-to-face Thursday. Vegas cameras everywhere. The boy's voice cracked with excitement. Norris simply nodded, tugging the knot firm, as if he had already decided. Outside, neon signs flickered to life across the strip malls. In Vegas, a hotel ballroom usually reserved for trade shows began its overnight transformation. Riggers hauling lights, production staff sketching camera angles, promoters whispering about ticket prices. The country refreshed its feeds. Two men, one chasing relevance, the other defending something older than fame, were now locked on a collision course. By the next morning, RSVPs would crash the site. By nightfall, scalpers would name absurd prices. And in the quiet between headlines, one truth hardened. Silence had thrown the first punch. The hotel ballroom was stripped of its corporate beige and rebuilt overnight into a stage. A black backdrop, two chairs, one table wired with microphones. Rows of cameras jammed into each other like rifles at parade rest. The air hummed with nerves and recycled air conditioning. Reporters jostled for angles. Fans who'd bribed their way in fidgeted in folding chairs, waiting for blood without gloves. The fighter made his entrance first. He wore a designer hoodie, hood up, the zipper halfway, so his chest gleamed with sweat. He chewed gum, snapping it loud enough for the microphones to catch. Instead of sitting, he prowled the stage, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. "This is a funeral," he barked, pointing to the empty chair across from him. "For myths." His cornermen clapped, their laughter too loud, too quick. Then the doors opened again. Norris walked in quietly, wearing a plain jacket and carrying nothing but himself. No entourage, no spectacle. The noise dropped by half without anyone asking it to. He took his seat. He didn't touch the mic. He let silence work. The fighter couldn't stand it. He leaned forward, arms braced on the table, face inches from Norris's. "I'd put you down in 60 seconds. You wouldn't survive the first round." His words spat, hot, desperate to provoke. The room responded like a storm front. Laughter, boos, claps, whistles, all colliding. Reporters scribbled, cameras zoomed, lenses reflected off sweat. For a moment, it felt like the whole ballroom might tip over from noise. Norris sat still. He waited. Long enough that even the fighter's grin faltered into a twitch. Long enough that the shouts thinned into a strange, heavy silence. Then he leaned to the microphone, voice level, almost quiet. "I've survived things you can't imagine. A minute with you wouldn't trouble me." It landed harder than a punch. Half the room exploded in applause, the other half whistled and jeered. The fighter laughed too loudly, his teeth bared, trying to smother the sting. "Words," he snapped. "That's all you've got." "I fight." He stood and shoved his shoulder into Norris's chest. The room gasped. Security half-stepped forward, then hesitated. Everyone froze, waiting. Norris absorbed the shove. His shoulders rolled with the force, but he didn't rise, didn't flinch. Then, slow as gravity, he stood. He closed the inch between them until his eyes were level with the kids. His voice didn't rise. "Be careful what you start." That whisper carried further than a scream. Phones shook in hands as people tried to capture every second. The fighter stepped back half a pace, then recovered with a barked laugh. He raised his fists, shadowboxed in the air, jabbing close enough to graze Norris's sleeve. "See that?" He freezes. He's a statue. But the room knew better. The crowd wasn't with him anymore. Not fully. Some cheered, yes, but others stared at Norris, stone-faced, breathing steady, and understood what quiet could do. The promoter rushed in to smother the moment. He grabbed a microphone, voice slick. Thursday night, a once-in-a-lifetime exhibition. Both men, face to face, on the same mat. History in the making. Reporters shouted questions. Is this a fight? What rules? Will it be sanctioned? No answers. Only spectacle. Norris didn't feed the noise. He moved the unused chair out of the way, clearing the space between them as if it were a mat, not a ballroom. The gesture was simple, almost domestic, but everyone watching knew what it meant. He'd already agreed. The fighter turned to the crowd, arms raised like a prize fighter, reveling in attention. "Vegas, baby," he shouted. "Come watch me retire a legend." His voice cracked just slightly at the end, but the roar of the younger fans covered it. The room dissolved into chaos. Flashes, chants, whistles. But those who had been watching carefully, the ones who studied expressions instead of noise, noticed something quieter. For the first time, in the second he'd been shoulder to shoulder with Norris, the fighter's grin had slipped. His eyes had flickered, fast, like prey glimpsing a predator in the dark. He had shouted louder to bury it. He had laughed harder to smother it. But it was there, recorded in pixels, stamped into memory. The fight had already begun, and no contract or promoter could slow it down. The ballroom emptied hours later, reporters carrying quotes like weapons, fans buzzing as if they'd witnessed prophecy. But the real echo wasn't in the chants. It was in the silence that Norris had turned into a blade. The announcement hit like a lightning strike. Not a championship bout, not sanctioned war, just a special exhibition sparring session. That label fooled no one. Tickets sold out in hours, scalpers multiplying the prices tenfold. It wasn't just fight fans now. Celebrities booked ringside. Retired fighters flew in. Even people who hated violence wanted to see whether arrogance or legend would break first. By fight night, Las Vegas glowed harder than usual. Neon signs seemed to shout, casinos vibrated with talk of odds, and the arena pulsed like a living lung. Inside, the crowd swayed between chants and boos. A single organism split against itself. Homemade signs bobbed above the sea of heads. Legend forever scribbled in black marker. New era scrawled in neon paint. The noise itself became the third fighter. Backstage, cameras found the young contender pacing, gloves on, hood pulled low. He grinned at the lens, sweat beading down his temples. "Tonight," he said, teeth flashing, "I prove idols are dust. Norris falls here." He flexed for effect, slapping his chest, playing the role he'd written for himself. His entourage cheered, hyping him higher. When his music hit, thundering bass, fire on the screens, he strutted down the tunnel, slapping hands, wagging his tongue at hecklers. The younger fans went wild, phones raised high. Every move screamed performance. He wanted spectacle, and he had it. Then the lights cut. For a beat, the arena was blind and roaring. And in that blackout, something shifted. No pyrotechnics, no walkout song. Just the quiet scrape of shoes on concrete. A single spotlight hit the tunnel. Norris walked out alone. Plain warm-up pants, a towel slung around his shoulders. No entourage, no theatrics. He didn't wave, didn't flex. He walked, calm as stone, and when he reached the mat, he paused only to look up at the crowd. The noise faltered. Thousands of throats, mid-yell, found themselves caught. Silence for just a second wrapped the entire arena. That silence stung sharper than any insult the young fighter had thrown. The bell rang. The kid exploded forward like dynamite. Fast jabs, sharp kicks, bouncing on his toes. He swung with the hunger of a man trying to break not just bones, but history itself. Every strike came loud, vicious, designed for dominance. Norris barely moved. A step here, a slip there. Arms raised just enough to deflect. He didn't swing wild, didn't rush. He watched, patient, letting the storm blow around him. The kid's fists whistled through air. Norris blocked with small turns of the wrist, shifted his weight by inches. The contrast was obvious. Chaos versus calculation. The crowd felt it. Some screamed the kid's name, demanding fireworks. Others started to notice the subtlety. How nothing landed clean, how every burst of speed was swallowed by calm defense. 2 minutes in, sweat poured from the young fighter's brow, his chest rising like a piston. Norris hadn't broken rhythm. He blinked slowly, breathing even, eyes fixed, unbothered. The kid taunted between swings, shouting insults, trying to rattle him. "Come on, old man, hit me! Show them something!" The crowd shrieked at every word, but Norris didn't bite. He stepped aside, letting a roundhouse skim the air, and the audience gasped louder at the miss than they had at the attack. A chant began to rise, confused, fractured, but insistent. One half of the arena shouted the fighter's name. The other half answered with, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The sound collided, wave on wave, neither side winning. The young man lunged again, aiming for spectacle, not precision. Norris slipped back, pivoted, tapped his glove aside with barely a touch. To the trained eye, the lesson was clear. This wasn't a contest of strength anymore. It was a demonstration of control. Even the commentators, usually hungry for drama, grew quiet for a stretch. One whispered into his headset, "This doesn't look like a fight. It looks like a clinic." And for the first time all night, the young fighter's smile cracked. Just a flicker, frustration leaking through the mask. He snarled, redoubling his speed, trying to force the legend into error. But the more he raged, the calmer Norris seemed. The crowd sensed the imbalance tipping. Their roars shifted from confident to anxious, from certain to uncertain. The kid was burning fuel too fast, punching at shadows. Norris, stone still at the center of it, hadn't even begun. And as the round wore on, everyone in that arena, friend, critic, fan, foe, started to realize the same thing. This wasn't the fight the young man had promised. This was something colder, sharper, harder to swallow. It wasn't a brawl, it was a lesson. The noise inside the arena was no longer excitement. It was electricity straining to ground itself. It moved like weather through the stands, hot, unstable, carrying the metallic taste of storm air. People had stopped eating, stopped scrolling their phones. Every eye was on the cage. The young fighter fed off it like gasoline, confusing volume for inevitability. He clapped his gloves together, smirked at the cameras, and lunged forward with a pace that looked reckless, but hid calculation. He wanted blood, and the crowd wanted proof. The first exchanges were frantic. He snapped low kicks, jab-cross combinations that cut diagonals across the space, each one fired with the arrogant speed of a man convinced. Endurance would carry him if precision failed. Norris didn't chase. He shifted angles with small steps, raised forearms like shutters, and let the storm pass inches from his frame. His economy looked lazy to casual eyes, but veterans in the front rows leaned forward. They saw the half-inch pivots, the shoulders slanted to drain power, the calm that smothered chaos. The kid's chest rose sharper, faster, breaths came clipped, as though his lungs were shrinking around the noise. Frustration leaked into technique. In the clinch, the young man pressed his palm against Norris's throat, holding it a shade longer than legal. On the break, his glove dragged down the older man's forearm, leaving a red mark invisible to most cameras. A heel jabbed toward the knee, a tactic with intent, not accident. Each time the referee barked his name, the fighter offered a toothy grin, apology in silhouette, defiance in spirit. The slope wasn't steep, but it was downward. Everyone could feel it. The crowd's roar fractured into a strange braid. Cheers, boos, uneasy whistles. A woman in the lower rows cupped her hands and shouted, "Fight fair!" 3 seats over, a group of college kids stamped their feet and chanted his name like a hymn to recklessness. The commentators strained to agree. One hedged, "He's pushing the line." The other muttered, "He's over it already," then left silence hanging like a verdict. The kid drove forward, head pressed to chest, arms hooked at the hips. Norris, framed with bone, turned him and reset him like a door closing on its hinges. The kid's answer was a shoulder bump that belonged to alleys, not cages. The referee wedged between them, palms high. "Keep it clean." The grin returned, stretched thin, almost manic. Sweat slicked the skin, making grips slippery, making mistakes easier to disguise. The kid pressed his forehead in too hard, not quite a headbutt, but close enough that intent dripped off it. "Watch it," snapped the referee, sliding into a sharper angle. The next second was the hinge, the short elbow. No warning, no build-up, just the clean crack of bone meeting bone, loud enough to ping across the microphones. Norris didn't stumble. His head twitched, no more than acknowledgement. He took half a step back, and the line opened above his right eye. Not a gush, but a steady leak, blood curving toward his temple, thickening in the heat. Copper scent drifted into the first rows, pulling the audience forward as if by instinct. Camera operators zoomed tight. Television screens across the country filled with the sight of red on the man they thought untouchable. The young fighter roared like he had just split the world. Arms flung up, he circled the cage, pointing at the cut, barking to the rafters, "That's how legends fall!" His corner banged the canvas in chorus, "He's cut! He's cut!" The audience fractured. Half the room stood screaming in ecstasy. The other half shouted disgust, voices clashing until the building shook. The referee slid in, searching Norris's eyes. "You good?" The answer was a small nod. Not bravado, not denial. Inventory. The ringside doctor leaned forward, considered, then stayed seated. The fight continued. The kid surged, desperate to cash momentum. A spinning elbow sliced air, a knee pounded forearms, a slap smacked on the brake. Mockery disguised as strike. He laughed, short and sharp, manic edge betraying how badly he needed the crowd to believe with him. The crowd obliged in fragments, but something in their noise had changed pitch, uncertainty bleeding through. Norris raised his wrist, wiped blood away in one smooth motion, and left a dark smear on his cheek. His eyes fixed on the kid, not as opponent, but as unfinished math problem. He said 6 words, low enough to make people lean in, loud enough for microphones to catch. "You just made your biggest mistake." The words didn't land like a shout. They landed like weight. Fans in the first rows repeated them, not realizing their own voices carried them deeper into the stands. The kid sneered, lips pulled taut, but his grin fractured at the edges. He attacked harder, wider. A hook met elbow and stung his hand. Norris answered with a body shot. Short, precise, a mark on a ledger rather than a strike. The kid's lungs dragged air like rusted machinery. His shoulders sagged imperceptibly, dropping the lie of dominance. The crowd sensed it before they could name it. A woman murmured, "It's turning," without clarifying what. Phones steadied. People held their breath. The fight was no longer speed against experience. It was arrogance against inevitability. The kid tried to borrow belief from the audience, raising his arms, beckoning cheers. The response arrived late, weaker, uneven. Panic flickered, hidden under anger. He stomped forward, threw a wide kick meant for posters and slow-motion replays. It swung like a banner. Norris stepped aside with a carpenter's patience. Weight settled, head off the line by inches. The strike kissed absence, balance faltered, and space collapsed. He didn't strike yet. He touched the kid's shoulder, gentle as punctuation. Not now, but soon. He circled half a step, cutting angles until the cage became wall, not horizon. The kid threw another elbow on the brake, late enough to be obvious. "Last warning!" the referee barked, frustration sharp. The kid grinned, but his eyes blinked too fast. Fear seeped through bravado. The cut above Norris's brow bled slower now, dark line drying into a crease. It made him human to those who had only known myth. For some, it raised respect. For others, dread. But in the cage, it framed him like ink outlines a blade. His shoulders eased into rhythm. Calm hardened into decision. The young fighter pressed again, searching for chaos. His foot planted wide, too wide, hip exposed for an instant, invisible to most, but loud to any who knew combat's language. Norris saw it and didn't chase. He simply marked it, knowing time was about to collect its debt. The arena knew, too. Noise drained into that strange hush before thunder. The commentators stopped talking. Spectators leaned forward, throats tight. A man in a luxury box set down his drink and forgot to touch it again. The fighter thought blood equaled victory, chaos equaled control, speed equaled truth. He committed with a final surge, wide and reckless. And that was the mistake that hadn't been punished yet. Norris's feet set, hands rose, the cut above his brow underlining everything like a signature at the bottom of a contract. The audience held its collective breath, waiting for the next sentence. The arena seemed to hold its breath. Thousands of voices collided into a roar so thick it almost turned silent, like wind trapped in steel. The cut above Norris's brow glistened under the lights, blood tracing down his cheek, but his posture was steady, his eyes locked on the younger fighter with the patience of someone who had lived through storms far worse than this. The kid came forward wild, swinging heavy shots, each one wider, sloppier. He had tasted blood and thought victory was already written. He tried a spinning kick, a back fist, even a knee. Moves meant for highlight reels, not control. Sweat flew from him in arcs, his chest heaving, gasping for air. Every strike sounded desperate, louder than it was dangerous. Norris barely shifted. His pivots were small, precise, enough to let chaos scrape by him. Where the younger man poured energy into every motion, Norris let economy do the work. He wasn't defending anymore. He was waiting, reading, tightening the circle. The crowd began to sense it. A chant built, uneven at first. Chuck! 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 Others shouted the fighter's name, but their confidence cracked, swallowed by doubt. The kid kept swinging, feeding on noise, trying to drown out the truth closing around him. Then it happened. A hook, thrown too wide, too slow. Norris slipped left, shoulders brushing the strike, and in the same instant fired a right hand. Short, clean, mechanical. The sound wasn't loud, just final. The fighter's body betrayed him, knees buckling, eyes blanking, and he collapsed sideways to the canvas. The cage floor rattled as his weight hit. For a heartbeat, silence. Even the cameras caught only the hiss of air. Then the dam burst. Screams, applause, whistles, chaos pouring from every side. People jumped to their feet, some in shock, some in awe. Phones raised to capture history. Commentators shouted over each other, their voices drowned by the wave. Inside the cage, Norris stood still. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't celebrate. He watched until the young man stirred, then crouched and offered a hand. For a moment, pride resisted. Then the fighter reached, and Norris pulled him up, steadying him like a teacher, not a conqueror. Blood smeared from Norris's brow onto the kid's shoulder as they stood. "Real strength," Norris said, voice calm but carrying across the microphones, "is respect." And you didn't have it. The young man's face sagged. He nodded once, small, almost ashamed, and turned away with his corner. The crowd saw everything, the victory, the lesson, and their reaction shifted from frenzy to something heavier. Applause mixed with reflection, a realization that they had witnessed more than a knockout. Reporters pressed against the cage, shouting questions. Was this Norris's last fight? Would there be a rematch? Did the kid's career just break? Norris ignored them. He wiped the blood from his face with the back of his glove and looked at the crowd instead, his silence louder than answers. Then another voice cut through the chaos. The fighter's manager, red-faced, veins pulsing, grabbed a microphone at ringside. "This isn't over. We demand a rematch. This time, no rules." The arena gasped. Words like "no rules" shifted the air, carrying something darker than sport, heavier than rivalry. Fans erupted in confusion, half cheering, half horrified. Cameras swung to Norris, hunting for a reaction. He didn't move, didn't speak. Only his eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition, as though he'd seen this path before and knew where it led. The noise turned volatile. Security pushed through aisles, trying to contain the swell. Fans leaned over barriers, chanting, screaming, recording everything. Some begged for another fight, others shouted for calm. The atmosphere felt combustible, ready to tear itself apart. Then the sirens, at first faint, then growing, red and blue lights flashing against the far walls. Police moved into the arena, not for the sport, but for the riot simmering in the stands. People shouted over one another, chairs scraped, the sense of control dissolved. And at the center, Norris remained motionless. Blood drying above his eye, hands loose at his sides, he stood calm inside the chaos. Cameras caught him framed in flashing lights, a figure unshaken while the world spun into disorder. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply stood, a still point in a storm that had only just begun. The broadcast cut there, but the image lingered. Chuck Norris, silent in the cage, while the crowd screamed and the sirens wailed, leaving the question hanging. What comes after a fight when the fight refuses to end?